right, thanks for opening the video. I'm Don Ford. This is Progressive Insider. Today, I am here with Warren Mosler, somebody who has built a bit of a name for himself in the world of MMT. Some might say the M in MMT stands for Mr. Mosler. Mr. Mosler, thank you for joining us. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I have heard only good things. So they're pretty intensely good things. So.
Oh, okay, good to hear that.
I really enjoyed your book.
Oh,
I read the whole thing.
Yeah.
I read the whole thing last night.
Yeah.
I really would like to give it a second read over, but I
Yeah.
it's,
Good.
we hear MMT as
Yeah.
a concept from all these different young people, and it feels like they only read the first part of your book.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Do you get that feeling, or is that just am I alone in that?
Well, it's worse than that. They start talking in ambiguities, don't seem to care. And so they come back to bite them and they don't even understand it. So when they say taxes don't fund spending, the word fund is a very ambiguous word.
Right.
It doesn't need the dollars to be able to spend, but it needs tax liabilities, or there's nothing for sale. There are no people who want dollars, no sellers who want dollars in return. So tax liabilities support the spending. You could say in that sense, tax liabilities fund spending, but not tax payments.
So what you're saying is basically that is that there's still a system, even though we have a modern monetary version of the old gold moving around, there's still a system that is kept intact to some degree or another that still has to function, because you got into how we use taxes in order. I'm going to use the words wrong because you introduced a lot of new language to me, but I understand conceptually what you're going with, because basically at a federal level, everything is the opposite.
Yeah, well, it's like the movie theater. They don't collect the ticket first and then sell it.
Right.
The football stadium, they don't collect the ticket first and then sell it.
Right.
Government's like the stadium, or the theater.
Right. Okay, yeah, I found the most eye-opening thing in the whole book that I found was that if you're going to start a government, there's no way to start a government without having like a military or some type of government funding where there's lots of government money in the world. And that whole bit about the hut tax, I'd never heard that before, about how it motivated people just to be a part of society in order to take action, the process of creating the need to sell, because without some form of taxes, there's no need for people to create anything. And I think there's
in exchange, there's reason to create, but not in exchange for dollars or yen or any currency. They'll create something in exchange for something else.
Right.
The government wants to. Yeah, the government wants to provision itself with what I call its otherwise worthless currency.
Right. I was talking about this in a live stream about how we have this thing where we do where we turn votes into these worthless points. We call them delegates, but how it's very similar to how video games nowadays, you buy coins in a game in order to get points in the thing, and how they change currency into this new form of currency. And just that whole process, I keep seeing this again and again. And the way you brought it up, it seems like it's the ultimate form of it. Could you explain it just a little bit so I could hear it again from you?
Yeah. So when we're talking about state money, the dollar, the yen, whatever, the money story begins with a state that wants to provision itself. They want soldiers, they want a legal system, they want public health, they want whatever. And so that somehow they've got to get those resources out of what I'll call the non-government sector or the private sector into the public sector. So how do you get those resources? How do you transfer them? So you go out in the street, just beat people up and take things, right? Or you can conquer another place and bring back slaves or whatever, like used to be done. But we use the monetary system. And so the way the state provisions itself is, number one, it begins with a tax liability. To keep it simple, just think about a tax on, real estate, or a tax on a head tax on people or something. The income tax alone is very complex for it to drive the model, so it's not a good place to start thinking about it. So
it's like a system that's progressed really far.
Yeah, it's second or third order, but it works. But I can explain it. But for the purpose of this example, just think about tax on everybody's house, real estate.
Sure.
Okay. If you don't pay, you lose your house. So it's very simple. And we've got lots of real estate taxes, so it's not a fabrication. Okay, and so the government imposes a tax on everybody's house. And this thing, the tax credit, the thing that needed to pay the tax, they call it the dollar. So you have a $100 tax on your house, you have a $1,000 tax on your house. So the government establishes a tax liability. It hasn't collected anything yet. It's just a tax liability. So the state wants to provision itself. It establishes a tax liability. That causes people to sell, to look to sell goods and services in exchange for the dollars they need to pay tax. Okay, that allows the government to then buy the things it needs to provision itself. So people now are looking for work that pays in dollars, so the government can now hire the military, hire the public health workers, hire the legal system, the judges, and everything else. Okay, then people get paid, then they pay the tax, and that kind of ends the cycle. So it begins with a tax liability. The government, people then look for work, and we call those people unemployed. They're looking for paid work and can't find it. So it's correct. The best way to think of it is that the tax liabilities are the cause of unemployment. So why do we have unemployment? Because tax liabilities create unemployment by design. They create people looking for paid work. That's what we call unemployment. Not people looking to volunteer for American Cancer Center.
But people have a hard time seeing this because the system has grown and so many tiers on top of each other.
Yeah, and maybe they do, and there's not a lot I can do about that except try and abstract from it, explain it, and hope it catches on, which I've been doing for 25 years now, 30 years.
Yeah, your history is really incredible. I think that I think that it was by far for me the most. I mean, I know your subject is very complicated, but your history was so interesting, and it almost like if I had concerns about reading the book again, hearing your history was like, well, I got to reread what this guy's talking about because he clearly knows what he's doing. And so I was just really taken aback by it. Now, when people are interpreting your thing and you're hearing them say, well, the money doesn't go anywhere and we don't need to do it anymore, you're obviously explaining there's a system here, and some part of the system is clearly archaic, but some part of the system does seem necessary to facilitate society, and it feels like on the other end of this is something like UBI that people talk about, but that makes your coupon explanation a little more complicated because it really radically changes the system.
So like with so let's say they put a tax on your house, and then they give you a UBI, so you have the money to pay the tax. All right, well, what's the point?
Right. That's kind of where my takeaway from it was. It's the same thing. Like my takeaway when I read your coupon story originally, I was like, well, I didn't understand until later how important that concept was because you reread it so many times. But initially, I was like, oh, well, in my obvious, simple brain, I'm like, well, the parents should be doing the chores are the taxes, the allowance is the UBI. But at what point in real life does that translate to why even bother? Why are we even doing it? Which raises the question: should we be removing some of our tax code?
So what you're saying is the government with UBI, the government is risking its ability to provision itself.
Yeah.
If you do it to an extreme, which might not be all that high, suddenly there'll be nobody looking for paid work, and then you have hyperinflation, what's called hyperinflation, where nothing's for sale, because why should you offer anything for sale if you can get the money to pay the tax through UBI?
Well, do you think that with like hypercapitalism being what it is, as we talk about these tiers of things that people are, and I don't support hypercapitalism. I think it's totally out of control. But as a concept, when we talk about society, would that propel us still through that sort of wormhole of change, or do you think that would still end up creating real problems?
So what you do is, it's like an extreme moral hazard situation. Now, a small amount of UBI is probably okay because the tax system's so convoluted. But there is a tipping point that's not too far away. But it's for example, you can lower the tax, to create more employment opportunities in the private sector, or you can increase public spending to hire the unemployed, people looking for paid work, right? And if you have people who, but so you do it through the job guarantee or something like that, but make sure there's employment opportunities for everybody. But they say, well, what about people who don't want to work? And the answer is, well, if you're sick or you're infirm or you're elderly, fine. But if you're able-bodied and willing to work, the system functions on collective action. The system functions on everybody working. And if you're not working, it doesn't function. So work is required for the output. It's not about the money, it's about the output. And so we've got a system of coercive taxation that fundamental to it is the idea that, that well-being is a function of work and output. And once we have more productivity, yes, and we don't need as much work and output, we can have more leisure time if we want.
Right, which is where people talk about the move towards automation and all the other things.
Okay, and what they're doing is confusing a productivity story with an unemployment story.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah, so we could outlaw lawnmowers and everybody has to cut lawns with scissors. We'll have lots of jobs. But we're going backwards, right?
Right.
200 years ago, 99% of the people have to be farmers or else we're going to starve. Now 1% can grow all the food for everybody and be a big export. So we've had huge productivity increases, and that allows people to do other things. That does not create unemployment. Because even after 200 years of these massive productivity increases, unemployment is 3.5%. It's not 50% or 90%.
It does seem like it's somewhat of a stagnant number across the board, except in extreme circumstances where there's
now unemployment is always a monetary phenomenon. It's created by taxation, where the government hasn't spent enough to cover the need to pay taxes and the desire to save. And the evidence is there's still people, the economy is still looking for paid work to be able to do the only two things it can do with the money: pay taxes or not pay taxes and save it.
Two questions for you out of that.
Go ahead.
Number one, and this is something I'm going to come back to because I'm going to refer to the tiered concept and talk about how things we're dealing with in modern day and how it affects your really complicated, economics. It's simple, it seems like, at its core, but complicated at its heart, which whatever that means anyways. So basically, do you think that when currency is stored offshores and it's out of the system, that it also, because that money is not, it's been given by the government in order to be put back into the system, and that money is now no longer in the system, that would create a shortage, in essence, to the government's numbers, right?
Right. So then the policy response is to either lower your taxes or increase your public services. So that's a good thing.
Right. But that's not necessarily happening because we're not honest with ourselves about the money. Because there's an equation that has to happen on the government's end where they acknowledge this money is being kept out of the system, and then they have to change the social services, and that bridge isn't happening. Yeah,
that's just a pure lack of understanding of monetary operations in the monetary system.
That seems like that's a running theme in this country.
We'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's ignorance, right?
That's
totally. Innocent fraud.
Right. Well, I don't know if it's so innocent anymore. I think that there's a lot of this that was probably my biggest problem I had. If I had a problem with your book, I was like, I don't feel that these are innocent necessarily.
It's a bigger insult to say it's innocent and they're too stupid to understand.
I love it.
So you give them the choice. You're either fraud or you're innocent. Which is it? And let them choose which one they are.
Well,
too dumb to get it, or
I think in your own experience, I couldn't help but notice that you were essentially manipulating the securities based on whatever they would let you do. And I'm sure they changed rules around the way you were making money. And I could definitely see some parallels to the selling that I'm still a little vague on, to how it compares to what we saw in like The Big Short in these movies, the popularized movies these days. Yeah. And it's pretty, I can understand how someone who had been through that, you don't even realize what you're doing because you're just doing your job. You're making money however you can.
I was in fixed income arbitrage and I had a fund. And my counterparties were people I traded with in Goldman Sachs, Salomon Brothers, JP Morgan, and they were not like individuals or investors' money. I didn't make my money off of other people or anything.
Oh no, I didn't mean it like that at all.
So it wasn't. So in that movie, there was a lot of talk of exploitation of all these funds all over. I wasn't doing any of that.
Sure. No, I think I meant more like you were at the stage of it all where you were literally innocently going through it, doing what you thought you could do. I mean, you didn't even know the outcome of what the long-term because no one could do the math, and that's the same problem I'm
Yeah.
having right now with election stuff, where I'm
Yeah.
explaining to people the rules, and I'm like, well, the math is here. They're adding ineligible voters, and people are like, I don't get it, and
Yeah.
I felt a lot of kinship
Yeah.
in that when I was reading your book.
Yeah.
So, but here's my other question. The second question I had about that. This basically is saying that austerity practices are completely wrong on every level, and it's intentionally harming the public, because it seems like if government funding, I'm going to use this language wrong, so you're going to have to fix this for me, but how government funding essentially funds all spending, and that goes on to create long-term growth. I want to say savings, but savings isn't
Well,
right.
let's put it another way. You can think of the public debt as the money supply.
Right, because it's all in
It's the-
reverse again. It's the amount of money that's in the
It's
world.
the net money supply. It's the only net dollars in the economy. The entire net money supply in the economy is the public debt. So can I give you a historical example?
Yes, please. I was very confused about this, but I feel like you can make sense out of it.
So I was in Pompeii with my wife, and we were on one of those tours where you just walk in and they take you around and show you, the site. And they showed us these coins that they had found in the ashes when the volcano went off 2,000 years ago, whatever it was. And these are coins that would have been in somebody's pocket, or would have been laying in the street, or maybe in a merchant shop, or it's under somebody's mattress or something. And the guide says to me, he says, it was a very nice place to live, because even though taxes were high, they had good public services. So these are coins, they would collect the coins for a tax payment, and then they would pay people for sanitation and police and that kind of thing. And so people wanted to live there. So, I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. So I said to the guide, well, actually they would pay the people first, and then they would collect the tax. He goes, no. You collect tax and then you pay the people. So I said, well, where did the coins come from? He says, well, the government made them. So I said, how did anybody get a coin to pay the tax?
They were distributed by the government.
So he said, so they paid them first and then collected them? I said, yeah, how else can it work? He grabs his head. He goes, no. And he walked away, and he wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the tour. Right? Now, everybody in Pompeii, I guarantee you, knew that they put a tax on your house or something. You'd have to pay them so many coins a month. People would show up to work and get paid in these coins so they could pay the tax. Somebody else would sell these people tomatoes or whatever. They didn't have tomatoes back then, but bread and pizzas. And they would get their coins to pay the tax, and the whole thing got monetized. And so the sequence was the state wanted to provision itself. It wanted public services. So it put a tax on your house. People then showed up for work. The tax caused them to become unemployed. They then got paid by the government to be police and sanitation workers. And then the taxes could be paid in the economy. Okay, so they spent first and then collected it. You still need taxes, right? Otherwise it doesn't work. Now, number two, they found something like 20,000 coins in the street, the archaeologists. How did they get there? How could that happen? Well, it's because the government paid people more than were used to pay taxes. The total payments might have been 80,000 coins, and maybe 60,000 were used to pay taxes.
Right. They flooded the system, not really calculating how many they needed to put accurately. They were
Well,
like, we'll put out enough.
Why do they care? If people were showing up to work and earn 80,000 coins, they're getting the streets cleaned and the police, and it's safe. And if only 60,000 coming in taxes, what do they care? The coins were not expensive metal or anything. It was cheap stuff. And so the point is, those 20,000 coins in the street, that's the public debt. Okay, those are coins that the government spent that haven't yet been used to pay taxes. Okay, the 23 trillion are dollars the government has spent that haven't yet been used to pay taxes.
Okay, wait. So does that correlate at all when we talk about people with the? I'm sorry, I'm going back to the same thing again. I'm not hung up
That's
on
okay.
it. I just feel like there's a correlation here. Maybe not I'm just trying to connect. That this money being left out is this debt number is money that has been spent into the system and taxes have not been paid on it. So is that
No, it's not haven't been paid. It hasn't been used to pay taxes.
Oh, okay. What's the difference between those two ideas?
So when the government spends $1, you're a postal worker or something, you get $1. Only one of two things can happen with that dollar by the end of the day. It can either be used to pay taxes, in which case it's lost to the economy, or it's not used to pay taxes and somebody out there has
Okay, so it's
Okay.
okay. I'm getting
So the
this.
dollar,
I'm getting this. I'm getting this. I'm getting it.
right?
Because it's
Yeah.
backwards. Again, it's all backwards. It's
Yeah.
totally
So
against traditional
when
thinking.
when Pompey paid you 10 coins to be a policeman, maybe 9 got used to pay taxes. The other coin stayed in the guy's pocket.
Right. So the money that is in offshore accounts is in someone's pocket somewhere,
Well,
and
be careful with the
not being
word
used to pay
money. Be
taxes.
careful with the word. Be careful with the word money,
Okay.
because a lot
Okay.
because you have growth. You have dollars in bank accounts that can come from lending or by government spending. They can either come through loans or through spending. If they're loans, somebody else, for every dollar borrowed, there's a dollar saved, right?
Right. And we're talking about the tiers now at this point, because now we're stepping
Well,
beyond when we talk about something as
yeah.
complex as
See,
what I'm bringing about.
People start talking tiers. I don't do that. So
Oh, okay. Well,
they
I
start
didn't mean.
talking monetary sovereignty. Forget that. You don't need. That's
Oh
just a
no, no, no,
self-defining
no,
number.
sir. No, sir. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
mean it like that. I meant
Yeah, I know.
historically. I meant
That's,
historically, like as it's
you know,
developed.
yeah. Now you have leverage, right? So you might have gold. There's gold miners that mine the gold, and they sell it. People wear rings and everything. But then you have gold futures where people are trading it for next year. Okay, and so and you could call those tiers, I guess. But it's just the
Yeah,
better
yeah,
word is leverage.
yeah. I'm using
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wrong word. I want to apologize to you. That I'm
yeah. No,
speaking
that's okay.
in a completely different terminology, and it's
Yeah,
not appropriate. And you're so specific. I do want to say
yeah.
that's on me.
No, but I have to be, and
I know. I thank you.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah,
for
yeah,
doing
yeah,
it.
yeah.
This is for me. I mean, my wife was just telling me, she was saying, Don, I really think you have the mind for it. You should learn more about stock markets and stuff like that. And after reading your book, I just realized how much I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's say we're trying to explain this to more simply to people,
Yeah.
and try to maybe get some of the places some people have been a little incorrect in explaining.
Yeah. So what would you say was the money supply in Pompeii?
Oh,
It
the
was a
actual
20,000.
money supply. You mean where the coins were coming from, or what backed?
No. They found 20,000 coins in the street, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was the money supply. That's what merchants were using to make change. That's what people had in their pockets. That's
Sure.
what was under the mattresses. That was the supply of net money in the Pompeii. Now, somebody might have owed somebody else money, and you could call their IOU money and things like that. But the actual coins, which were the realm of the state, coin of the state, the public debt, they spent more than they collected. That's where the money supply, those 20,000 coins, came from. And as the city grew, I bet if you doubled the population, you'd wind up with 40,000 coins in the street, right? People would need more just for the economy to function. It might only be one coin per person. It might have been 20,000 people there, right? Well, when you get 40,000 people, everybody wants to walk around with a coin for good luck or whatever. Now the government can spend, 40,000 more than it collects.
I read your book, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, there's so much in this that people need to understand, and I think that's why
Yeah.
MMT is catching on as a concept so
Yeah.
fiercely. But I feel like it's been oversimplified by people who only kind of understand or read the first rule, because right in the beginning we hit that taxes doesn't fund spending, and then you explain it does.
Yeah, I don't say that right away that it doesn't fund it. I said spending is not constrained by revenue. It's constrained by what's for sale. Now, you see other MMT proponents talking about how you don't create inflation until you run out of resources. But it's not whether you have the resources, it's whether they're for sale and whether the seller wants dollars. Once you run out of sellers who wants dollars, then you start driving up prices.
Right, because it's essentially the same thing. If someone chooses not to sell anymore, you are essentially out of resources, and there is that.
Well, are you?
Well, no, you're not. But the thing is
right. See, there's the ambiguity I'm talking about.
Right.
And once you let that seep in, and you're not specific, then you get pushback that you can't defend, and not only that, you get pushback in a conversation you're not in, and they all agree you're wrong and walk away. And it never even gets clarified.
Right. I always say that when it comes to, and this is a sidestep of the economic policy, that as people always talk about the establishment as a concept, and I always say, they're like, we have to do away with the establishment. But guys, there's always going to be an establishment. As long as there are resources to meter out to a society, there will be somebody controlling those resources. And who controls those resources determines basically what kind of society you have. And I think you're really making that point necessarily, but more specifically, from an economic perspective of just because someone chooses to not sell resources, it doesn't mean we don't have resources. And that doesn't mean that,
Right.
but that still causes inflation at a certain level. And that's where humans manufacture inflation to make the items worth more than they should be. Is that kind of where am I going the right direction with that?
Well, if Pompeii has a tax of 10,000 coins, let's say total, and they pay 1 coin a day to their workers, they know they're going to get at least 10,000 work days out of the population, because people need to do that just to get the coins to pay the tax. They won't get any less than 10,000 days of labor. If they might get 11,000 or 12,000 because people want to earn extra to save, which is what happens. But it's going to be roughly in that amount. They can't get 20,000 days labor out of those people with the 10,000 tax if they're paying 1 coin a day. The math doesn't work. Now, if they paid half a coin a day, yeah, then they could get 20,000 hours, right? But 20,000 days. But if they're paying 1 coin a day and the tax is 10,000, they're going to get 10,000 days of labor. It's a very simple system.
There's definitely a connection between that. These ideas are and I understand why you're so frustrated when you explain it to people, because it's like, again, I hate going back to voting, but this is what I know. Like, there are times when a popular vote and delegate number, when the math is all based on popular vote, if those numbers delineate, there's a rounding error. And this is sort of similar in the idea that people always see these ideas delineating from each other, but they don't. They should be stable. They should be stagnant. And that's what keeps the economics of your society functional. That's really, I think, the point you're making. It's actually much simpler than people are realizing at its core. And when I talk about this layered concept of how things change, not economic layers, but historically, as we add on like a piece of cake, you keep adding cake to make the laws more complicated. We end up in this place where
where
you start, you don't know how to talk about what's going on up here.
Right. But what happens is the fundamentals get lost, and so
exactly
the logic that follows is flawed from the beginning.
Interesting. Context is everything, and I feel that since it's this reverse context, it just you lose everything so quickly if you see it the other way. And this is why our government keeps crashing when we have a surplus, because they're approaching the economics of our country backwards, because once they are in control of our country, you have to flip it all around and do it the other way.
Well, the biggest problem now are these tariffs. Okay, the U.S. economy has been going downhill for over a year since the tariffs kicked in.
Right.
Job growth,
soybean tariffs, all these things that are happening, right?
Job growths have fallen in half. Industrial production's gone negative. Okay, everything's decelerating into recession, and it was doing perfectly fine before the tariffs. But the tariffs have support from like 100% of the population. China, somebody had to stand up to China. The Democrats are all big protectionists, and we need to stand up to China, and we should be even more restrictive based on whatever. So it's kind of bipartisan. So you don't see any debate on this whole trade issue, and that's what's killing the economy right now. And you don't see any of it from the MMT proponents. They're talking about job guarantees, which is important, but meanwhile, it's like changing the deck chairs in the Titanic, where the iceberg is the tariffs. And it's taking the whole ship down. It's already hit.
Now, you had a part in your book about putting tariffs on steel for defense purposes, so that defense people would use.
For security, you don't want to get in a war and not be able to keep your military.
This actually has.
It's called strategic. But you don't put tariffs. You don't put tariffs on. That's not what I said. I said you source domestic, steel for the military domestically. You do not put tariffs on imported. Let us buy the imported steel as cheaply as possible for, non-strategic things. If it's strategically important, yes, then you want to source domestically for security. Because security is more important than economic well-being. Okay.
That's interesting to hear from you, sir. You don't hear that a lot from proponents of MMT.
Well, why do you have a military at all? Because those people could not be building more cars or doing more healthcare. Because without it, that's a higher priority than these other things. You have to survive first, right?
Right, and you've really made the point that it serves both functionally to put money into the system, as well as because the military is a great way for the government to put money into the system, and
but the thing is, you don't want to put any more into military than you need for defense. It's not like an ornament.
Right, right. You don't want to be like that's the only
Because it's a
way.
cost. It's a real cost to the rest of society. It's a
Sure.
drain on your standard of living. It's a huge drain on the U.S. standard of living right
Well,
now.
this
And
is I think you're bringing up the issue that where we're dancing around a word that's so important that I do feel
yeah,
like the proponents of MMT lose, and that's the word balance. And I
yeah,
feel like there's a balance to all this. It still has to be maintained. And sometimes people are like, no, it's simple. It doesn't need to be balanced. We do all this or we do all that, and that just doesn't feel right, nor it just doesn't resonate with new people either.
yeah. And and that's just a misunderstanding of reality.
Now, what would you say? I mean, how would we, you hear them say it. This is probably the
Yeah,
number one thing we deal with. It also kind of alienates new people. I mean, I've spent 4 years, I've known about VR currency for years and years and years. I was a hippie in
yeah.
Venice Beach in my 20s, so I know all about it. And
All
and we
about, all
did
about what? I'm sorry.
fiat currency and what a problem it
Oh,
is.
yeah, 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 yeah,
The gold to the silver standard, and how this whole process has
yeah,
changed government.
yeah. The Wizard of Oz.
Right, and I was very aware of how you said that we're still using outdated
Yeah,
terminology in
yeah,
reference to how we handle it, which is a big
yeah.
issue. So if we're going to be talking about this from the perspective of solutions, what is the thing that you hear the most that people are getting wrong, or not wrong, they're incorrect about it at a functional level that would help the movement grow, or maybe people better understand it?
Okay, so I'm not sure. Um, I don't. The one thing that I think is gets people in and then gets them hurt is the idea that uh, taxes don't fund spending. Where what they should understand is, the government is not constrained by revenues. The government doesn't need tax money to spend. That's a very different statement.
Much
Now,
more
it might,
complex.
yeah, well, the government doesn't have to collect tax. Tax collection. They don't need the actual dollars to be able to spend because they spend first. Okay, the important thing to say is, look, government spends first and then collects tax. The money to pay taxes comes from the government. President Obama once said the money comes from the government, and he got shouted down. And they said, no, only the private sector creates real wealth. And they confuse wealth and money. And he backed off and said, okay, yeah, you're right. Well, he was right. He didn't know he was right. Okay, the dollars to pay taxes come from the government. And so the idea that the government can run out of money is not applicable. That's where it comes from. And so, and so, and so that gets lost in the ambiguity when you say taxes don't fund spending. Somebody says, well, without taxes, you're going to have hyperinflation, and people don't understand that. And they say, well, okay, well, taxes then help with the value of the currency. Yeah, well, that means you need taxes to be able to spend.
Do you,
All right. Otherwise, you can't spend. You can't spend if there aren't tax liabilities. They have to be more precise to say tax payment doesn't fund spending. Tax liabilities fund spending.
right? Okay, okay. Oh Jesus. Okay, sorry.
And I know it's something might be too complicated for
No,
somebody,
it's
but
not too complicated. It's not too
yeah,
complicated. It's just that when you
yeah,
get, okay, so I explain things that are super complicated to people
yeah,
like on the daily. It's like all I do is try to
yeah,
take ideas like this and I try to bottle them up so that people will
yeah,
understand them.
yeah,
And I see what is missing here. And it was the concept, which we've talked quite a bit about in this interview. It's the concept of tax liability versus tax spending.
yeah.
And
Tax payment. Yeah,
tax payment. Thank you.
yeah,
By the way, being so patient with
yeah.
me. So tax liability as a concept, we see them, and tax payment, we see them as the same thing, and
Yes, yes.
and that's where things get really complicated. I have
Yeah.
this suspicion that there was a particular metaphor you had in your book that I think that is causing a hang up in people, where
Okay.
you talked about the money being destroyed when it goes in the other room, because the physical money is destroyed. That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
It might as well be. It doesn't make a difference. They print currency.
yeah,
Print currency. Who cares? Destroy the currency, print the same currency to match it up. It doesn't actually, shipping the currency is probably more expensive than just destroying it.
yeah.
But I think that people get confused because I think they think that it like stops existing, even though it's moved.
Well, it does.
Still.
It does. So if you have $100 in your account and the
Mhm.
bank changes that to zero because you have to
Right.
pay your taxes, the $100 is gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Right. No, I understand that, but I'm saying from a, how do I say this? I think that when like a person on the ground who hasn't been in in
Yeah.
what you do so deeply for so long.
Yeah.
That concept comes across two ways. Like, yes, what you're saying I can see is technically accurate, but I think people interpret it as then it's no longer part of a greater system. There's no longer a functional use for taxes anymore. And you explained very well there is a functional use for taxes. And I think that people lose that connection because I don't know, maybe they stop reading.
Yeah, there's a functional use for tax liabilities.
Sorry, yes, a functional use for tax liability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, see how the precision is important.
Oh,
So,
I do.
But when you pay your taxes, the money is gone. It's no longer in the system. It doesn't exist. Ceases to, it's a dead parrot, you know?
Right. No, I understand technically that's true, but okay.
All right, so you buy a $1,000 ticket to the Super Bowl, and you sell it to the next guy for $5,000, right?
Sure.
Then you go to the game, and what does the guy at the gate do? He tears it up. Why would he tear up a $5,000 ticket?
Right, because it's only worth the seat that he's going to sit in.
Well, because it's used up. It's done. It's
right.
run its course. Okay, so the government puts a tax liability on, pays you with a $20 bill. You use it to pay taxes, and they tear it up. It's the same thing.
Well, here's what's going to be really annoying for you, sir. I completely understand this. I do get what you're saying completely. I think there's a disconnect, though, in where people who are often out on Facebook or the internet talking about this issue. And we've discussed how the tax liability serves a purpose to drive the economy and keep this whole system flowing. And even though the money does disappear when it goes wherever it goes, because it no longer exists for whatever purpose, it moves in the spreadsheet and it's gone. People have somehow turned that around into taxes don't fund spending. We don't need taxes anymore.
Right.
And that's where this whole, we all fall off the rails, because when you're trying to convince people we do need taxes, and people are like, yeah, but that's going to cause hyperinflation. And people are like, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, people aren't going to have enough products to sell because there's no need to sell products. And that's going to make everything cost more. And extremely. And we have good examples of that in other countries where they can't produce stuff at the same level that we can.
Yeah, and so, it's because they don't start the story at the beginning. If you start at the beginning every time the government wants to provision itself, it imposes a tax liability, creates a seller, pays them, and then the money comes back. Now, the word tax return is return to the government, right? Revenue is the French word for return, or Latin word, whatever it is.
Is that because they give you the money and then you basically spend it again, and that's just more money to facilitate the economy growth?
Well, you know, when you're paying your taxes, it's your tax return, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, they call your tax return when the government gives you money back. I've never heard your tax return.
You got to fill out your tax return.
Oh, you're right. You are right. Yes. And then their tax return is just a colloquial phrase for the thing. Yeah.
You're thinking of a refund. You're thinking of a tax refund.
Right.
But your tax return is what the whole report is called.
Right.
You file a return of tax money to the government. You're returning it.
I file my own taxes every year, right? No, I don't.
Yeah, and then you're returning government its money. And then it throws it away, or debits your account.
Right.
Once it's returned, it's over. That's the end of the cycle. But you have to start at the beginning. That's not the beginning. That's not an intermediate stage. That's the end.
Because the government doesn't need to hold currency, because it just creates currency. And you made this point, and now something just clicked. Because
you got a beginning, a middle, and the end.
Right.
The beginning is a tax liability. The middle is where you go to work for the government and they pay you, and then the end is you pay your tax.
Right.
There's beginning, a middle, and an end.
And if you forget that when you talk about all this stuff, you've basically forgotten what drives the whole system at its core.
Yeah. So they'll say, oh, well, there's unemployment. What are we going to do about it? Well, you're not starting at the beginning. You say we hire the unemployed or whatever. Okay, start at the beginning. How'd they get there? Well, tax liability. And then the government hired as many as it wanted, but it didn't hire everybody that the taxes caused to become unemployed. It made a mistake. The tax should have been lower. It didn't need to create all these unemployed. So let's fix it. Either hire them or cut the tax.
It's all in an imbalance. And this is back to people who are in charge.
Tax was too high.
Right.
And so either hire the people that you caused to become unemployed, or lower the tax and they'll go back to where they came from.
Question for you.
Yeah.
As someone who's been alive for so long, you've seen the American tax bracket change quite a bit. And part of your book, you had said that when you lived in New York, you were paying a 50% tax bracket in addition to a 20% state tax. Was that correct?
Yeah, I think it came out to like 80 or 90, 85% or 90% or something.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
No, it wasn't that high. On 900 and something dollars pay, I took home like 300.
And
So it came out to 70%.
that for me, being on
Yeah.
the other end of taxation, I'm 38.
Yeah.
I've only seen taxes where you could like basically become, I'm an actor too, so you can do all
Yeah.
kinds of tax tricks to have like zero tax liability. And I'm just wondering, I don't even know what the question is. For me, it's like
Yeah.
there's shock and difference from one to the other. And how would you say living in the two different versions of taxation, like what was the difference from your end on like how it was? Because I know we had a lot of these areas when taxes were very high.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of public spend, or excuse me, there wasn't a lot of private spending to improve areas. So it relied entirely on public spending. Am I getting that right?
Well, there was a lot more risk taking because you're kind of, if you lost money in a business, it was tax deductible. You didn't have to pay taxes, right? It's only, and so so if you had $1 and you lost it in the business, you really only lost 30 cents because you would have paid 70 cents in taxes if you hadn't invested in the business. So there was more risk taking and a lot of stupid risk taking, and there were a lot of like absurd tax shelters that were just a complete waste of human endeavor going on. So I didn't think it was a productive way to do things. And it employed untold thousands of tax accountants, and tax shelter businesses and industries. All these people could have been curing cancer or teaching school or doing something valuable. And it created this whole, it's one of the things that creates this fire sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, which is, a total parasitic drain on the economy.
Interesting. Yeah, insurance as a whole is one of these things that we always talk about that sort of, you love it when you need it, but the rest of the time it's just sucking you dry.
When I started it in 1972, the U.S. had, I don't know, maybe 200 million people. We had 2.6 million housing starts. And there were only a bunch of stupid S&Ls. I worked at one of them. We'd take in deposits and make loans from home mortgages. And we financed the whole thing, 2.6 million houses, right? With no financial sophistication whatsoever. So then in 2007, for example, which was a big boom time, right? Big housing boom. We got up to 2 million housing starts with like 310 million people, which is not anywhere near what we were back then. And it was called an unsustainable bubble. And our productivity is like 20, 100 times higher. It's like it's an absurdity. That's not like some unsustainable bubble. It's like historically it's a depressed level. But what's the difference? 30% of S&P profits were in the finance, insurance, and real estate. Back then it was 5% or something like that. So we've got everybody digging holes and filling them in and calling it finance, and there's nobody left to do the rest of the work.
You just said something really important that I think that will help, because what you just said was like, there are going to be so many listeners are going to be like, I know what some of those words mean. But I think that you really nailed something at the end there, which is these insurance companies are essentially digging holes, charging you to dig a hole and charging you to fill it back in. And that's basically become this huge part of our economy where they don't really do anything. They make their own problem and then clean and get paid to clean it up.
Yeah. But the problem is, there's tens of millions of people employed in finance, insurance, real estate that could be doing something more useful, something actually useful, whether it's, building things, which we don't really need anymore, but all the services, right? Like curing cancer, doing research into whatever, and writing software, and making life better through services, right? Instead, they're all tied up in this worthless endeavor. In real terms, there's no value added in real terms.
I know you said services in there, but you were also using all science terms. Those are all scientific jobs, and a huge part of our society. And this is I'm another subject. You have to put money into the sciences in order to be competitive with other countries, or else. And it comes back to that needing to outsource. We can't produce things domestically because they only produce it internationally, and it has a lot to do with whether or not we're putting our investment in people into
Yeah, but I mean,
sciences or into these whole digging and
well,
refilling.
well, let's say it all went into the arts instead of going into finance.
Sure.
All those 20 million people working in finance, we supported 20 million people in the arts. Are we better off or worse off? You know, we get all
it's out of balance.
We got all this entertainment, right? Instead of having a bunch of stockbrokers calling us up trying to get us to buy stock, we've got people entertaining us in different ways, like performance, right? These are choices we're making with our system every day.
Well, I would definitely like it if some of those investors were investing in more of my movie ideas. I'll tell you what.
Yeah. Yeah.
God, this has been so fascinating. I think my favorite part of your book was actually the concept of children as an investment instead of an expense.
Yeah.
Because we see children as a chore in America, and this has become this thing where we put it off. We take people away from their kids so they can be with their job by not giving them proper leave. We put them with nannies. We put them with these people. We put them away from us, and that ultimately it makes it more of this expense and chore than it does an investment where we make sure that the next generation is handled properly. And again, I know I'm putting everything back to politics, but in the Democratic Party, young people are the future consul. We have this huge old organization. We have to hand it over to people. So I think that what you're saying is true, not just in real life and party politics, but in just in everything we're doing. And I really appreciate that when you came to really complex financing, that we didn't forget about the next generation that have to maintain everything we do.
Yeah. Well, look, children are the number one real investment there is, because for the future, because without any children, there's not much left 50 years from now, except a bunch of us who, can't do anything, retired people, and nobody to take care of us, right? I mean, the whole life on Earth ends without children. So it's the fundamental investment. And all societies look at it that way. In Australia, way back, they used to call children the currency. Okay, so it's
I can see
that's your investment. Yeah, but what we've done is, because of our monetary system, we've turned them into an expense rather than an investment. Something that has to be, paid for, which investments do. But the way we've set it up, we've made children too expensive for the source that has to pay for them. And so we're dying out. Population growth is going to zero and negative. We're the only population species that's ever gone extinct because it didn't understand its own monetary system, not because of some natural force. It's
right.
A complete absurdity.
Well, okay, so I'll give you an example of my personal life. My wife, we're of the life, having children age. Yeah. And my wife has been very nervous about whether or not we should have kids because finances are very hard. And I've been trying to explain to her that in California, it actually makes sense to have your first couple of children, when you're still poor, because government covers a tons of expenses and handles a bunch of things that go on. In the same way, she's Canadian, so Canada would handle all these things.
Yeah.
And how, it's the negative approach, it's the opposite approach most people would think, but it's based on the economics that our system actually provides for us. So it seems like we have all these smart people saying, oh, I need to wait, when everything says you shouldn't wait. And then at the same time, we have these people who are, I don't want to say, the folks who are the least prepared to have kids are having kids at an incredible rate. And so it's causing.
But that's slowing down too.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But there's still a rate. Well, that has a lot to do with food and water and what we're actually.
So we don't even have that anymore. We don't, that source. As soon as women become educated, they have fewer children.
But I feel like in our economic system, we should be creating a system where people feel as comfortable as possible having children and making it as easy as possible for them to raise healthy, happy, intelligent children. I feel like we're doing the opposite.
Look, in the 1960s, where I grew up, in the 50s, 60s, late 50s, the husband could work, make $2 or $3 an hour, and the wife could stay home with the kids. They could afford that, right? So we only had the participation rate of the population was much lower. And, you could have a car and a house and go to school and college and everything else. All right. Today, with two people working, you can't do it. Okay. You can't make ends meet. So they're not having children. All right. So, and our productivity now is like 100 times higher than it was 50 years ago. We've been gaining 2% a year, compounded, way up. And so what's going on? What happened?
There's a round error somewhere.
It should be the opposite. It should be one, if the productivity went into the same place as it was, then one guy working should be able to support 10 families instead of one. But now it's the other way around. Now 2 people working can't even support a family.
Right.
Okay, it's how we've set it up. It's not the real world.
Okay, so here's the question. So taxation has gotten more complex than just government taxation. We're being taxed in a number of complex ways. When we translate into normal kitchen table economics, right? People are being taxed tons and tons of ways. And I do feel that we've gone away from the taxation that actually helps our system work and gone into taxation that keeps the money out of the system, which is going to cause more of these problems that we talk about.
So the purpose of taxation, if you ask any congressman, is to raise revenues to be able to pay for spending. And so given that, they come up with all this crazy stuff, this suboptimal solutions to what our real problems are, because they've got the sequence backwards. They don't realize it's tax liabilities, then tax payment, okay? They see it as they have to collect money to be able to spend. They don't see it that the real force is that we need their money to be able to pay tax, right? The economy needs the government's money to be able to pay its taxes. It's not that the government needs our money to be able to spend. They've got that backwards. Because they've got it backwards, they've got the sequence backwards, which is core MMT. The first thing I came up with back in 1992 or whenever it was we got the sequence backwards. Okay, they think you got to tax to be able to spend, and what you don't tax, you have to borrow from China and leave the bill to our grandchildren. It's all backwards. Okay, and so
you learned this like accidentally too. I feel like looking at your history, I feel like you didn't go into this thinking that this was a thing. You went into this realizing it through practice that this is true.
Yeah, right.
Currency.
Yeah, I happen to be an insider in monetary operations. It was part of my daily job, if you want to call it that, to look at these things, look at how the accounts clear at the Fed. Now, any senior staff official at the Fed understands exactly what I'm saying. The conversation doesn't take, we're going on for an hour. It's like less than 3 minutes with one of these guys. They already know this stuff, okay? Vince Reinhart was head of monetary affairs for, I don't know, 15 years at the Fed. I don't know where he's now, up in Massachusetts working for a fund, but he was, like, he's an economist. He was Greenspan's right-hand man, then Bernanke's right-hand man. Guy helped me write some of my speeches, okay? it took no, he's absolutely on top of it. And they use different language. They say, you can't do a reserve drain without doing a reserve add, which means you can't take money out without putting it in first. That's the Fed. I mean,
why are they making their own language for it? Are they just trying to confuse people more?
No, that's because they're called reserves inside. And
okay, all right. Oh, because they're like inside again. So it's there.
Yeah, when you spend, you're adding it, so it's a reserve add. And when you
sorry,
taxes are reserve drain because they lower the amount of balances in everybody's account. It's just how you talk in a bank. And so when you say, the government spends first, they go, well, yeah, of course, you can't do a reserve drain without doing an add first. You can't do a drain without doing an add. You can't drain water out of the sink without putting water in. I mean, they look like it's obvious. Doesn't everybody know this? It's like, no.
Apparently not. Okay.
Yeah. But that's every insider, that's every senior staff at every central bank in the world knows this. Exactly what I'm saying. And they've known it for like forever. This whole MMT thing is just monetary operations as understood by a senior officer at a central bank.
Yeah, it's almost like, again, not to go back, I guess this is just what I know, but I'm dealing with the exact same issue in politics where we figured out this thing in Iowa. Everyone in Iowa, every major political person that works there knows about this problem, and just no one does anything about it. They just figured out how to manipulate it, because when your team is winning, it's not a problem.
Well, these guys are dead, honest, hardworking people. It's not, they're not political or anything like that.
Politicals are not. Let's just get that straight, right?
No, the senior staff guys they're really good academics, good, institutional. They're technocrats, right? Highly professional technocrats, making, half of what they'd be making in the private sector. They're good public servants. I have 100% respect for them. They're intellectually honest to the core, but they're not in any political positions. They're not FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee. They're not voting.
They don't have a ton of power, is what you're saying.
They're not in any political authority. they're just doing their jobs inside the system to keep it functioning. It's like the guy who does the computer programming. He's not the guy who's the voice of Facebook, but they all know how it works, right?
Right. Well, speaking of
Yeah.
guys not knowing how it works and at the same time being a little confused, I could be a little confused myself, but it seems like
Yeah.
you accidentally saved the country of Italy. Does that sound like something accurate? Or
Yeah. 1992 or three, I forget exactly when. 92, I think.
like, oh, hey, we're going to fix your country. Did you know you just were putting this number in the wrong place? And they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that was Luigi Spaventa. And a week later, the statements came out, no extraordinary measures will be taken, all payments will be made, and the crisis went away.
No, were they really no, I don't know anything about this crisis. This is a little bit before my history awareness of economics. So what was going on in Italy? And can you just give me like the short version of what exactly happened so people can understand?
Well, we'd had the inflation of the 80s, and the central bank was raising interest rates. And government debt to GDP was way up to 120%. And all the academics were writing about how this was unsustainable, and the debt was growing faster than the income, and the interest rate was higher than the growth rate, so the debt would grow geometrically, and they were going to be insolvent, and they might as well declare bankruptcy and start over. And so Italian bonds were trading. You could you could buy Italian bonds which were in lira at 12%. You could borrow lira to pay for them at 10%. So you'd make 2% for doing nothing.
They're just moving currency around, essentially, right?
For taking the risk of owning the bonds, because everybody thought the government was going to default in their bonds. And Rudy Dornbush was an MIT professor, I think, who had been writing about this default. And when we went there, Professor Spaventa had his papers on it. Dornbush's papers were on his desk. Everywhere we went, Dornbush had been there first, dropping off his report about how Italy was going to default. And we pointed, and fortunately, he understood monetary operations. Somehow he had been in central bank, or somehow, I don't know how, but when I said, Professor, it's just a rhetorical question, but why are you borrowing all these lira? Is it to get the lira to spend, or is it because if you spend the lira and then don't borrow, interest rates will drop to zero? And he looks at me and he goes, thinks about it, he goes, no, they'll only drop to 0.5% because we have a support rate. I didn't know that. But as soon as he said that, I knew he got it. And then he jumps up out of his seat and starts going into a rage about the IMF and how they're making them act pro-cyclical. And we were supposed to be there for austerity. They're trying to impose austerity on them because of the Italian debt ratios, and it was their own currency. And I was there with my associates, and we were supposed to be there 20 minutes. And he starts calling in people from the other offices at Treasury. And they start making us cappuccino, and it's like it started off as like a depression. Everybody was like
a funeral. Sounds like.
Yeah, funeral. There's this dark cloud, and all of a sudden they're all celebrating at party time. They're all in. He starts explaining to them.
They had their own 0.5% protection rate that kept them from defaulting, essentially.
But that's just no, not from defaulting. That was just to keep the interest rate from going to zero.
Oh, okay.
I said you have to sell securities at 12% to support the rate, to not let it go to 0.5%, not to get the money. It's not about getting the money. It's about rate support. It's not about funding. And then he got it, and the lights came on, and then they're bringing in people, and they're celebrating. 2 hours later, we had to sneak out to get to our next meeting.
So wait. I want to put some pieces together. So the IMF was forcing them to lower their rates below.
No. The IMF was trying to get them to raise taxes and cut spending, austerity.
Right. And now, is that because they were trying to get them off the lira and onto another currency?
No. They just thought their deficit was too high.
Okay. Well, I'd like to talk about the IMF another time, because I'll be honest with you, I know extremely little about it as a concept.
Yeah.
There are so many conspiracy theories that I know there's some truth to some of them, but I know there's a lot of conspiracy theory to it.
It's mostly momentum. The IMF was set up, Bretton Woods agreements with fixed exchange rates to help countries that were running surpluses or deficits, get over their tough times by lending them, and then coming up with programs to help them keep their exchange rates fixed. But then we went off fixed exchange rates formally in 1971. So now the IMF doesn't have
it doesn't seem like it serves the same purpose anymore. Based on what you're telling me, it seems like a government with its own currency and a proper system for pushing.
So in 71 we went off, suddenly the dollar they were no longer fixed to the dollar. The whole thing fell apart. So now the IMF didn't have a mission anymore, so they could disband it or come up with a new mission. So they came up with a new mission, which was to somehow support emerging market countries or something.
Which I don't feel that
It's
is.
not a clear mission anymore. Yeah.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's become something else, but we can get into that another time. I hope. Now, we did not even talk about at all your 7, I keep calling them fallacies in my mind, but you call them
Deadly innocent frauds.
right, your innocent frauds. And I have a bunch of notes that I took on them.
Okay,
because
go ahead.
a bunch of things. I feel that I want to reread it, and I want to do a whole bit on just this 7 rules and
Okay.
explain them to people, because we're at about an hour right now.
Okay.
And the turnaround on the interviews when they get longer than an hour ends up being too long. So it's
Okay.
almost better if we do more interviews that are shorter to talk about this
Yeah.
as a series. Would you be open to something like that?
Sure.
Because I'm learning so much, and I feel that if we keep working on this, not only are we going to teach other people what's going on,
Yeah.
but I'm going to understand it better, and I know my wife will be more proud of me because this is stuff she actually cares about. Well, sir, I want to thank you for joining us today. This was such an educational experience, and I'm really excited to say it looks like we're going to be doing a lot more of these. This is not the type of subject that can be handled in just a single 1-hour video, and I think anyone who watches this is starting to get that idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a bunch more of these, and that's also going to go with a whole bunch of other content that we're putting out with Progressive Insider. You should be able to become a Patreon supporter at this point, and we have all kinds of great benefits for them. Looking forward to seeing support. Looking forward to you seeing more of our videos. Again, I'm Don Ford. This has been Progressive Insider, and this has been Warren Mosler. Thank you very much, and you have a great night.